Welcome to the Iferia TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today we are joined by Anouk Brumfield, a former executive vice president and senior partner at IBM with over 30 years of experience leading global teams and billion-dollar portfolios. Now, she's a certified life and mindset coach, international best-selling author of 30 Days of Yes, and co-author of You Are Working Too Hard. She helps high achievers navigate reinvention, step into their next chapter, and learn that doing less might actually be the key to achieving more. So, Anouk, I am very excited and honored to welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
I am super excited to be here. I really do appreciate you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to welcome you. So let's get in started, Anouk. You spent over 30 years climbing corporate ladder, becoming an executive vice president and senior partner at IBM, managing billion-dollar portfolios and global teams. So what was the moment you knew it was time to leave? What did you say yes to that the corporate world couldn't offer?
That's a very good question. And I had a very successful career. I feel really blessed for those 32 years that I worked in corporate America.
Hmm.
God talked to me and to tell me it was time to do something differently. And I began to question God because, I had risen all the way to vice president, senior partner, had a very great compensation package. And I knew I needed to be obedient, but obviously God was telling me it was time to re enter life. If I cannot say it differently, you have to realize that in life, there is truly a purpose that we must serve. And so I then just was obedient and I've been doing what God is telling me to do. And so I've been re-intervening and looking for ways to help serve people.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. So, you talk about the invincible ceiling that brilliant professionals hit, not because of what they don't know, but because of how they see themselves. So, what does that ceiling look like, and how do you help someone to break it?
Yeah, I believe the sky is the limit. There are, people say that there's ceilings, but I believe that you can achieve whatever you put your mind to. And so
Mm,
as I'm working with people and my coaching or mentoring people, I feel like you have to be, of course, your authentic self, but you need to make sure you have a design to make sure you are evaluating what your goals are and you start with the outcome in mind. So if you know you want to get to X, then we build you a plan of how you can get to X. So I don't like for people to think about ceilings. I like for people to realize the sky is the limit and that if you are very intentional, you can have whatever you want. And I believe that no one gets anywhere alone, that in order for you to achieve your goals, that it really does say that you have to surround yourself around mentors, around coaches, around sponsors, so that as you know what your outcomes or your goals or whatever you're trying to achieve, they can then help you, whether it's giving you support, it's giving you advice, it's opening doors for you, whatever that is. So I do try to get people to think differently. And let's not think about, those ceilings. Let's think about going after whatever your goals are.
all right. So, you wrote a book called 30 Days of Yes. Tell us what inspired that book, firstly. Okay, firstly, give us an overview of the context. Then tell us what gave you the inspiration or motivation to write the book. And lastly, tell us who the target audience are.
Yeah. So the first book that I wrote was called 30 Days to Yes to Me, The Power of No. And I wrote that book because I felt like oftentimes I was prioritizing everybody else and everything else.
Hmm.
And we have to know that it's important for us to love ourselves and to prioritize ourselves. And it's okay. So I want to give us permission to do this. So the book is a really simple book. The original version was a really thick book. And then I realized we had to be realistic of what society is today. So I scaled it back at a very simple 30-day journey of something that you can read in one sitting, but that's not my advice. My advice is for you to use it as a journey, gives you something to do for 30 days so that you can truly make sure that you're driving yourself to become the best version of yourself. And in order for you to be able to be helpful to others, you need to make sure that you yourself is whole, you yourself is complete. And that comes with making sure that you are prioritizing yourself. And I'm really excited that the book became an international, bestseller. So I was super excited about that achievement. And I think it's because so many people realize that we're saying yes to so many other things. And it's simple. We need to say yes to ourselves.
Okay. All right. So, Anouk, how does saying yes change someone's life, especially for high achievers who are used to controlling every variable?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. When you say yes to yourself, it's really a matter of you, number one, making sure that you know who you are and making sure you're staying true to who you are and that you're not sacrificing your values. So once you do that, it'll be very easy for you to say, I know this is what my purpose is. This is what I need to do. And it's okay for me to be my authentic self and to put myself and my needs ahead of other things. And that is what I'm excited that the book really does. It actually releases you to exhale some of those things that you shouldn't be focused on. Sometimes we try to be what I consider God, and we need to let God be God, and we need to do our part. And it starts by, really focusing on yourself and prioritizing yourself.
Okay. All right. So you also co-wrote You Are Working Too Hard, about doing less while achieving more. So for an engineer or a founder who's proud of their hustle, how do you convince them that working less might actually be the answer?
Yeah, so one of my very good friends that worked with me at IBM, we co-authored a book called You're Working Too Hard. And this book is a book around leadership because we know that like in our careers, we may be really technical, we may be, kind of focused on that, skill. But when you want to take life to the next part, not life to the next stage, is not always being the best doer, it's being the best influencer. And so with
Mm,
that, it's making sure you have some key skills to actually lead. And so this book, You're Working Too Hard, is really targeted to anybody who wants to be influential around leading projects or leading people. And it gives you some really key, simple tips because a lot of times we go in, working on, the objective, and we have to first think about who is our biggest asset, and that's the people. So if you're working on a project, you're working on a team, you're leading an organization, you have to remember that the people are our biggest asset. So I believe you have to go slow to go fast. And there's something about the power of like. You have to spend time to get to know those people, and then they will work really hard for you if they know you
mhm.
and like trust you. So it gives you tips like that because a lot of times we don't do that. We're just so focused on, what are the deliverables? But I say, hey, let's go slow. Let's get to know the people because once you get to know the people, they'll work really, really hard for you. And I believe employee satisfaction is directly proportionate to client satisfaction.
All right. All right, Anouk. So, you have led global teams and reshaped business strategy at the highest level. So, what's the single biggest leadership lesson you learned from your IBM years that you still teach today?
Yeah, very good comment. And that's a good transition to our last point is that I really do love people. And as I was leading those global teams, as I was working on, a $1 billion portfolio at times, The whole focus is don't lose sight of, the people and making sure that you keep things simple and you drive clarity. Because a lot of times things don't fail because of the talent. A lot of times it fails because lack of clarity. And so I believe that you have to make sure that you are making sure that your team truly is on the same page. And so you're effectively, communicating and that you're showing people that you care about them personally. You care about the whole person. And that is something that I have found to be very transferable. That worked for me in corporate as I was leading all those global teams, no matter what industry. That worked for me as I was working with different clients in different industry spaces. It works for me now, whether I'm doing community work or doing coaching and helping people. Those things don't change. It is very, very clear. I just finished this big transformation consulting gig that I did for a year, and one of the key things that I kept telling my client is that let's keep things simple. Let's make sure the entire team has clarity. Everybody knows their roles, and that we make sure that we are communicating and that we're giving people a safe space to challenge things and also to recognize and admit if they make mistakes, because we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. And we really want to make sure that people feel comfortable and they feel safe so that they can go deliver the best possible results to the client in all situations.
Okay. Okay. So, Anouk, you said you help people navigate transition, say yes to their next chapter and understand that reinvention is not only possible, it's powerful. So what's the first step for someone who feels stuck but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, I think the first step is to realize that when you're trying to reinvent yourself, it's not random. It's something that has to be intentional. You have to have a system. So you have to first know what you want to accomplish. Then you have to evaluate where you are. Then you might need to kind of figure out, what are the things that may be preventing you from getting where you want to be, where you want to change, where you want to go. And then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to start small and grow. So you may have to have a prototype and things like that. So the whole real key is knowing that you have to be systematic. You have to have
Mm-hmm.
a system. You have to be very deliberate and intentional, because it's not something that's just going to happen just because you want to be different. You have to really put effort to it and treat it just like a project. Just like in your life. So we go to work, and a lot of times we have systems or we have processes that we manage with our work products. And we should do the same thing with our life. We have to kind of remember that things are not just going to spontaneously happen. We need to drive a system and be very deliberate and intentional so that we can be very effective.
So, Anouk, you've coached high achievers who look successful on the outside but feel stuck or unfulfilled inside. So what's the most common hidden struggle you see?
Well, I do coach people with that issue. I would say I once had that issue as well, right?
Uh-huh.
You can be very, very successful in your professional life, but there can be other issues. And it reminds me of a time when my son was in the seventh grade, and that's when I first became an executive. I was getting all these accolades professionally, but I was dying on the inside because I was not balanced. And so one of the things that I would encourage and what I see a lot of people that I coach is that they lose balance. And it's important that even when you're trying to accomplish things professionally, don't lose sight of what you need personally and stay balanced and in sight and in sync, because life is really short and life is really precious. And it is an opportunity. A lot of times people think that I can be successful at one or the other, but I believe there is a proven system that shows you that you can actually be balanced and achieve success on both fronts.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that I had to go through a hard lesson where my son's 7th grade year, I wasn't involved at his school. My mom had to step in and do all those things for me because I was busy traveling, progressing up the corporate ladder. I was going through a separation. And so I felt so empty, even though I was making more money and even though I was getting promoted, I was still not happy because
Mm,
I was out. And so I just really, when I coach people, I always like to start off with making sure you know your why. And once you know your why and you know your values, making sure that you remember your why so you never sacrifice your why. And then whatever your values are, that you live up to those values and you don't do anything that's against those values. And when I was in corporate initially, and like that 7th grade year of my son, I did not have this type of knowledge. I just thought it was about moving up that corporate ladder. And I did not realize that, when you have all these balls in the air, the ball that you don't want to fall or crack or break would be the one that deals with like your health, deals with like your family and things like that, because you can always adjust things career wise, but you don't get some of that time back. I'll never get my son's 7th grade year back.
okay, so Anouk, when you are in that position, where you are an high achiever, you look successful on the outside, and you feel stuck or unfulfilled inside. So, why do you not speak out to the people close to you? Why don't you tell them about this?
Yeah, because I feel like oftentimes we high achievers don't feel like it's okay to be human. We want to
Mm,
keep shield up and we don't want to be open and transparent. We don't want people to feel like we have, issues and concerns. We want people to feel like, we're robotic and we can do it and we can get it done and we can keep going like the Energizer Bunny. And I just feel like that is something where we need to do a better job of taking off the mask and realizing that it's okay to be human, and that in your humanness that you will get the support that you need, and there's ways that you can exhale, there's ways that you can be balanced and to get the coaching and the mentoring that you need in order to figure out how do you accomplish both and how do you be balanced. But I know, like, I feel like when I was first in corporate, some of that stuff didn't seem like it was acceptable, but as I was in corporate longer, like in my latter years in corporate, it seems like things began to shift, that people realized that people were coming to work as their whole self. Like when I first started in corporate, it was like you don't mix your personal with your, business. So you're there to work and you don't bring in all the other stuff. But things did transition because if the person is happy, they will likely perform better. And so that's why I think it is important to make sure that you understand when you're working with people, you're leading people, that that's a person, it's not a thing, and that of course you have a job to do, but you really do need to show people that you care personally so they can open up and get the support that they need if they're having any personal challenges. So again, I don't think it was acceptable at some point, but I do think it's becoming more acceptable. And as people get coaches and mentors, I think that gives them a safe zone as well.
what's one moment in your career or coaching journey that completely changed how you show up for others? What did you learn from that moment?
Yeah, so very interesting. I have been a high achiever probably all my life.
Hmm.
I was so focused early on with progressing up the corporate ladder. I remember when I got my first leadership position. I remember telling people on my team, don't come to me with problems unless you have potential solutions. So I was probably not approachable then. I was focused just on that goal. And then over time, I began to understand that I was not being my authentic self because I truly love and like people. And I began to say, why can't I just show up as my authentic self, even in the workplace? That how do I achieve that? So I began to, because I saw I had some employees that had some personal challenges. And at that time, I didn't know if it was acceptable for me to let them know that I cared. I had heard about some of those challenges. So then I began to say, hey, I'm not going to follow the models that I see out there. I want to differentiate myself. I want to
Mm,
make sure that they see me as human, and that's when I began to change, and I began to change my whole leadership approach. And I began to focus on the people first. And once I began to focus on the people first, my team began to deliver amazing results. My team began to feel comfortable. My team began
mm,
to feel valued, and so, again, there was a shift in my career where I had an aha moment to say that I don't have to be one person at home and a different person at work. And so then it
mhm.
made it easier for me that I can peel that onion back and just be a nook in the workplace, the same a nook that I can be at home, which is a very kind and caring individual. And of course, with that, I can still drive the clarity and making sure the team was moving in the right direction. And when they needed help, to give them the support. Because at one point, I felt like I was a leader and I was focused on that title and that position. And then when that light bulb came on, I realized that a leadership is not really a position or a title, it's really an action. So I began to transition to be a servant leader. And I felt like when people saw that I was really there to serve them and to make sure that they were successful, then it changed my whole trajectory. And that's when my career really, really began to flourish. And I became, you know, happier.
All right. Thank you very much, Anouk, for sharing that with us. So, part of the theme of this podcast is centered around the word innovation. And for that reason, we like to save, some questions on that topic for every conversation we have on this podcast. So, for you, Anouk, after 30 years in corporate leadership and, now guiding others through reinvention, what does innovation in leadership and personal growth mean to you now?
Yeah, I feel like it means a lot. We must continuously grow. We must continuously develop, and you must never stop learning. And so, even though I left corporate, it will be like 3 years coming up in August. Time has truly flown that I am still continuously learning and developing because I feel like you have to continuously innovate. It's a
Mm-hmm.
continuous cycle. And when you stop learning, you stop growing. And I don't want to ever stop growing. I want to continue to innovate and learn new things because I want to make sure I'm always an asset and can add value to any project or any person or any situation that I'm in.
All right. That was a really interesting response, Anouk. So, to wrap things up here for our listeners who actually want to, go learn more about your work, read your book, 30 Days of Yes, or maybe take the next step in their own reinvention. So, where is the best place for them to go start?
Well, I'll give you two resources. So I learned so much in corporate that it is amazing of how I did not have any role models in my family that had been in corporate. And I was raised by a grandmother that only had a third or sixth grade education. And I love a big challenge and I love to figure things out. So what I've done is I've taken a lot of key lessons that I learned in corporate that applies to life. It applies whether you're in a leadership position, aspiring to be in a leadership position, or just work on teams with people. And I've put things together in an online curriculum. And you can get that by going to getThriveLeadership.com. And that's Get Thrive, that's THRIVE leadership.com. And I have an online curriculum that you can do at your own pace. I think you'll find some really great tips to kind of really help you in leading in any situation. Also, I do a lot of coaching. You can also just go to my regular website, which is Anouk, ANOUK -MC. And you can see all the things that I have in store and you can reach out to me. It gives you links to all of my social media pages and contact information as well.
It has been such an insightful and amazing conversation with you here today, and I'm truly, truly excited and honored having you as a guest on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been my absolute pleasure. And I would just encourage you and all your listeners to make sure you say yes to yourself.
Thank you very much.